Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 16th of June 2024. This is a Geopolitics video that summarises the last 2 days because I didn't do my Geopol one yesterday. Mainly going to be talking about the peace summit that's been taking place in Switzerland over the last couple of days. It's come to a close now. 2 days peace summit involving 92 countries and 8 organisations. The main goal of the summit is to initiate negotiations based on the UN Charter and international law. Discussions will focus on 3 points from President Zelensky's peace formula: nuclear security, food security and freedom of navigation. Zelensky emphasised the importance of having a unified basis for peace and acknowledged that the road to peace will be long but must follow the right path. This is really important. We're going to do this. If we're going to do this, we're going to do this properly, and it's going to be in accordance with international law. This is such a far cry from Russia. So let's just compare them very quickly. Ukraine has brought together 92 countries and 8 organisations to do things properly and to discuss peace. Now, I know Russia wasn't there, but Russia's own demise, it would have then just become a big wrangling session rather than getting some idea of what the correct course of action should be in terms of international acceptance. Russia had just before that released their own idea of peace, which is Ukraine giving up stuff. It's like, I don't know, me just going into my next door neighbour's house and saying, I'm helping myself to this, and nicking a load of stuff and saying, right, I'm staying in your lounge at the moment. And, Jill goes, what are you doing? This is my house. And then all the other neighbours say, what are you doing? What are you doing? So, okay, right. If she wants peace, I'll have the whole downstairs. You can live upstairs, Jill. I'm having the whole downstairs and I'm going to add it to my house. That's what will get peace. And if you don't take peace, it's your fault for not wanting peace. What? That's obviously nuts. But that's what Russia is doing. It's invaded another country and then demanding if peace happens that they get even more territory than they've taken already, than they control already. It's just insane. Anyway, we'll come to that in a little bit. But the difference is huge to the two approaches here. Now, we've had a total of 57 of the 160 invited countries being represented by presidents, vice presidents, or heads of government in the peace summit. So that's really important. Another 35 countries will be represented by lower level officials, ambassadors, ministers, and state secretaries. China refused to or declined to attend the meeting. The absence of Russia, this is what Mark Rutte, the sort of present Dutch prime minister, the absence of Russia at this table at the peace summit is an absolutely correct decision. There will be peace when the aggressor respects international principles and the UN Charter. On point. Work on the joint declaration at the peace summit is complete, says Dmitry Kuleba. So that is now being signed. It will be open to other countries to join even after the summit. We already know that several countries are analysing the joint communique and plan to join it, although they are not at the summit now, the foreign minister said. So it could be more than the countries that have already agreed. More than 90 countries, one huge sign for the future peace process in Ukraine, says Olaf Scholz here. That's absolutely fantastic. So that image, again, compare that to what's going on with Russia. It just gives you this idea that Russia is the pariah state that it's become. That, you know, who would you rather be at the moment? Not just militarily, but politically. Who's got friends and who doesn't have friends? It just really stark difference, I think, between the two countries. And I love this from Justin Trudeau. I know he gets some hassle from people who don't like his liberal attitudes and whatever, but this is great. I love you got all these like really serious politicians standing there for this photo shoot, and he's just there going, Slava Ukraini, just shouting it out. Like, everyone's like, hello. Brilliant. More power to him. Good stuff there. Excellent. Zelensky meets Zelensky's met all the leaders of all these countries, had different side sessions off with different countries. Really useful networking period, I think, the last couple of days, coalescing all of these great leaders, and then all these leaders can talk with each other as well. It's just opportunities like this are really, I think, really important. You might think it's going around and schmoozing around. No, a lot of stuff happens, I think, at meetings like this. And that is fantastic. So, I mean, here it talks about Argentina and Kenya being met with on the sidelines. President Zelensky met with Javier Milei and Kenyan President William Ruto to discuss bilateral cooperation. Of course, trade and food security is interesting for Africa, isn't it? Anyway, here we're going to listen to a few of the leaders and what they had to say. This is the Moldovan President, Maya Sandu.
Peace is not capitulation to the aggressor. Occupation of parts or entire countries is not peace and can never be the foundation for peace.
What annoys me is when we have appeasers saying, America is saying you should have peace, just go to the table to get peace. Occupation is not the foundation for peace. You don't say, oh, we're going to have peace now. Like Jill next door, it's not the foundation for peace. Like, the foundation for peace is kicking me out of the house and the neighbours coming together to get me kicked out of the house. And then, right, where do we go? How do we go forward so you two don't keep coming to these, or so that you, Jono, don't keep doing that to Jill's house? Like, we can't start discussing peace until Russia is withdrawn the army from Ukraine. And essentially, we get back to 1991 borders. Like the very minimum, it's 2014 borders. But what you're talking about presently, or what Russia's talking about presently, is even more than what they presently control.
Does anyone here at this table believe that giving up parts of your countries can truly bring about lasting peace?
Yeah, how would you feel? How would you feel if Mexico went in and took part of Texas and then said, right, we'll have peace, but by the way, we'll have the whole of Texas and Arizona? The US would be like, you what? Absolutely nuts. And then this is good stuff from Kaja Kallas, the Estonian leader here.
Principles such as sovereignty, territorial integrity, discrediting aggression as a tool of statecraft are the most important elements. They must at all costs be preserved. Hence, it is critical that these principles are also upheld in case of Ukraine. That is why I'm concerned to hear about the so-called peace plans or initiatives that don't even mention these principles. These are the core principles of the UN Charter, the principles that form the basis for securing peace globally. We should be very careful not to leave an impression that some topics and principles, such as especially Ukraine's territorial integrity, are somehow secondary to others. They clearly are not. Upholding these principles is the most important way towards a just and lasting peace. They must be at the core of any future peace framework. The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has lasted for 10 years. For the bigger part of it, the world has ignored it. There was hope back then, and some are also hoping now, that territorial concessions to the aggressor would bring peace. History has proved that giving up territory for peace has too often led and will lead to further aggressions. To achieve peace, we will have to learn from our own mistakes. Failure to do so would bring a colossal cost in human lives across the globe. Estonia, my own country, went through Russia's colonization and occupation for almost half a century, up until 1991. I grew up during the last part of that time. My own mother, forcefully deported to Siberia as a baby, has suffered from war crimes that Russia inflicted upon far too many. In theory, it was called peace, but it was peace on Russian terms, meaning mass atrocities, meaning repressions, meaning colonization.
Really good stuff there. I love her accent. The Baltic accent sounds great. So the Baltic nations have such a good understanding of what Russia is, who the Russians are in terms of, politics, and they don't want to get burnt again. The deportations that happened in history. I was speaking to someone last night who has a Lithuanian wife that was talking me through her family's experiences and so on and so forth. Just, really powerful that she's saying, occupation is not the foundation of peace. Again, very much expanding what Maya Sandu has just said before. Really really good stuff from her. And here we have Lithuanian leader Nausėda talking, and we'll just pop into what he has to say.
Responsible for atrocious war crimes.
Oh, this is annoying. I'll have to read it out from the subtitles. So, it is impossible to achieve a just peace without bringing those responsible for crimes to justice. This must be done, he says, on the basis of the UN Charter. To ensure this, we want to create a special international tribunal. So it's really important that if we're going to do peace, we're going to do it properly, and it's going to be done in accordance with international law. I urge the participants of this summit to join this tribunal. Finally, I want to note that the international community must make sure that the peace is sustainable. We all need to agree on a mechanism to deter Russia from further aggression in the future. Thank you very much. Absolutely. Yeah, not only must there be a lasting, sustainable peace here, but it must also act as a deterrent, act as a means to hold, Russia accountable, and so that they don't do this again in the future, not just to Ukraine, but to any other neighbouring nations they might have intentions on. Some quotes from the peace summit just extracted here from the Ukrainian Review. USA. Yesterday, Putin put forward proposals to resolve the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, but he is not talking about negotiations. He is talking about the surrender of Ukraine. Saudi Arabia. Any serious negotiation processes require the presence of Russia. So that's important because they have not signed the peace negotiations here. The communique. European Council. Peace between Ukraine and Russia requires a dialogue between the parties, but it is up to Kiev to decide when it can be started. Poland. Russia remains a colonial empire that never went through the path of decolonization. That could deal with the demons of its past. I've talked about this a lot previously, that Germany's come to terms with its past. It's that really long word, Verknochenheitsfall, whatever that word is. I should go and find it now, shouldn't I? That's it there. So it's Vergangenheitsbewältigung, the idea of accepting its past and then coming to terms with it and being therefore able to get over it. Well, Russia's never been through that, and it's such an issue for getting it to understand where it's at now and how it can reform itself. It's a bit like an addict. That you don't accept that you've got an addiction, you can't get over that addiction. Italy here saying, Mr. Zelensky, come to Italy. We are ready to send a new package of military aid to Ukraine. Moldova, peace in Ukraine is peace in Moldova. Estonia, Russia is a colonial state for almost half a century. Until 1990, Estonia was part of the colonial system of Russia. Germany, it's not enough to stop the war. It is important not to allow the conflict to freeze, leaving the risk of continued aggression. Great Britain, Ukraine did not ask for this war, but Ukrainians are impressive in defending their state. European Commission, freezing the war of the Russian Federation against Ukraine is not an answer, but only a recipe for future wars. And Japan, today it is Ukraine, and tomorrow it could be East Asia. Lots of important views. In fact, I could spend hours talking about what's been discussed at this peace summit. But do you know what? Of all the things that were said, the president of Slovenia, I think, has said it the best. This is absolutely on point. Really pithy. You can't get any more concise than this, but this sums it up. If Russia stops fighting, the war will stop. If Ukraine stops fighting, the end of Ukraine will come. People need to understand that. If you want peace, Russia needs to stop fighting. If you want destruction, Ukraine needs to stop fighting. It's that freaking simple. Who needs to act? It's not Ukraine. Stop saying Ukraine needs to do X, Y, and Z. Stop saying Zelensky needs to do X, Y, and Z. You need to say Russia needs to do X, Y, and Z. Those who claim that they are all for peace are all for peace that enables Russia to claim as much of Ukraine as it wants. It's completely disingenuous. The Slovenian president has nailed it. Absolutely nailed it there. Right, we've got Petr Pavel here. Important decisions to be made this year, says the Czech president on the prospects for ending the war. We're asked what can be expected on the battlefield. Pavel said the most important thing for today was to provide Ukraine with everything it needs to hold its ground and prevent further Russian advances. Quote, and when Russia realizes that it has no chance of achieving its goals on the battlefield, together with efforts in the area of getting China involved in pressuring Russia, all this will create a situation in which Russia will realize the need to come to the negotiating table, Pavel said in his comments to the BBC. And then for the following countries did not. So you have the list of countries and organisations that support the joint communique. So this is basically the end result of the process. So it's 80 countries and 4 organisations. Those who didn't: India, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Indonesia, South Africa, and Thailand. As I've heard some people say UAE as well on there. Note this: India, Brazil, and South Africa are members of BRICS. Saudi Arabia and Thailand are looking to become members of BRICS. Mexico and Indonesia don't know what's going on there. But it's interesting how much BRICS is playing a role in this, and just really frustrating that, you know, you got Modi there essentially saying, as Ukraine Power Map says, Modi, I support Russian terrorism. Of course, that's not what he said, but he might as well have said it. You know, BRICS, I know it's not the threat that they would like it to be to the kind of world order. And some people often criticize me for giving BRICS too much credibility. But it's not about what BRICS is now as a power structure, but it's if it keeps gaining these nations that, yeah, some of them are not powerful. So you've got the Taliban wanting to join. You've got Saudi Arabia. They are powerful. That's an oil-rich nation. OPEC, hugely important. But then you've got other nations like Zimbabwe wants to join. And so Thailand, interesting position in Asia there. So it is important. BRICS is important, and it is a threat, and it's not where it is now, but where it might be in 20 years' time. And you want to nip this stuff in the bud. Now, while all this has been happening, as I mentioned in my previous video, Trump has said at a rally that he's going to threaten immediate cessation of Ukraine aid if re-elected. There you go. That's what we are dealing with, I guess. It's really frustrating. We'll return to that in a second, and we'll go now to the regular geopolitical stuff. Now, we had the Putin demands for peace and a ceasefire. Now, it's really interesting, and this is a great little side-by-side here from Sarah Rainsford. I always talk about how words really matter, and words do matter, and it's not that these headlines, one headline here has been put together with an agenda in mind, but I just think people are sometimes sloppy. But if you read that, if you're scanning over the headlines, then it gives you an impression that Russia is putting in this effort to have a ceasefire, and it sees, I think, Russia in a more positive light. But it's all by the way it's phrased. So on the one hand, we've got Reuters here saying Putin demands more Ukrainian land to end war. Kiev rejects the ultimatum. Right? That is a sensible way of reporting that. So what Putin's not saying, oh, let's have a nice lovey-dovey ceasefire and sorry about all the horrible war-y bits. He's saying, I want more land, right? And that's an ultimatum. It's your last chance you're going to get. Give us more land, and then we'll have a ceasefire. And then Kiev going, no, that's an ultimatum. We don't like it. So that's a responsible headline. And then ITV here, a UK news source, says Putin promises immediate ceasefire if Ukraine withdraws troops. As if, so if you don't know much about this war, you would think it's Ukrainian troops are in places that they shouldn't be. If you withdraw your troops, we'll have a ceasefire. And that paints Putin and Russia in a positive light. Now, if I read that, I wouldn't interpret it in such a way because I'd be interpreting it through my prism of knowing what's going on, right? But for many people out there, that I would say that's really irresponsible journalism and headlining there from from ITV. We need more thought. It needs to be better thought. Whenever I was writing headlines for my own articles, although quite often my editor would write their own headline and change it, but I always think very carefully about the wordage, and the same with my articles, and hopefully the same with my videos with that philosophical background, that I'm just very careful with the way I say things, which is why I get really annoyed when people misinterpret me and then quote me as saying something, straw man me as saying something else. And like, mate, I pay a lot of attention to how I phrase things. That's not what I meant, and it's not what I said. So words are important. Right, Olaf Scholz, about that peace proposal from Putin, said that it is not serious. Quote, not serious, which is great. G7 leaders have not discussed Putin's proposal for a peaceful resolution to conflict because, quote, everyone knows they're not serious, Olaf Scholz said. Earlier, the Russian dictator, I love that, call him dictator, that's what he should be called, demanded that Ukraine withdraw its troops from the 4 regions and refuse to join NATO, says Nexter. Okay, so there's some translations here of some Google translates of what Putin has said, or articles concerning what Putin has said about sanctions, because it's hilarious that there are these contradictory statements. So Putin said EU sanctions benefit Russia. So this was the line. Sanctions benefit us. We don't care about sanctions. They benefit us. Putin pointed out the benefits of Western sanctions. Putin said sanctions forced Russia to develop its own products. Putin said the Western sanctions will benefit Russia. The less junk, the fewer bed bugs, he's quoted as saying. And then Putin demanded the lifting of sanctions against the Russian Federation in exchange for an end to the conflict in Ukraine. Like, so what do you really think, Putin? Oh yeah, sanctions are really hurting you because it's part of your demands that they get lifted. If they really were beneficial to you, you wouldn't want them being lifted. You're like, I love the sanctions. Sanctions are awesome. We keep them going, but let's have the rest of the ceasefire. But we'll keep the sanctions because it's such a benefit to us. You know, less junk, fewer bed bugs. No, sanctions hurt, mate, and you know it. Right, and then the idea that Russian forces don't occupy 40% of Donetsk, 25% in Zaporizhia, 25% in Kherson, 1% in Luhansk, but yet, you know, does Putin expect Ukraine to abandon 18% of its sovereign territory? Like, we want even more that we've got. That's our minimum requirement for peace. Man, it's incredible. Right, at the same time, as I reported earlier, but I think it's worth repeating in this geopolitical section, Russia is running a program flooding the newsrooms of 800 mainstream news outlets with fake stories and narratives about to overload verification processes. That is a real challenge. There are lots of fake quotes for celebrities around the world saying things that are pro-Russian and anti-Ukrainian. And I hope that they don't land, because you often can't undo, or very rarely, really, can you undo the damage done by fake news that travels much faster than truth. Banks in Russia face yuan shortages after dollar and euro trading halted. Sanctions against Moscow exchange have halted trading in the dollar and euro, leading to a shortage of yuan for Russian banks. Banks turned to the central bank for a record 14.23 billion yuan in loans, and the central bank increased limits to swap transactions to 20 billion yuan a day. Because of the sanctions, market participants fear yuan trading could also come to a halt, making any international payments more difficult. A great strategist has defeated all dollars. It just gets more complicated for the Russians. So what sort of idea I was talking about yesterday, where I was like, the Russians must just wake up every day and go, what's the challenge today? What's the challenge? Oh, we run out of yuan now. Oh, brilliant. It's just nothing gets easier for Russia. However, having said that, there is this bit of an issue, although I think there are particular localized reasons for this, or time-sensitive reasons for this. Russia overtook US as a gas supplier to Europe in May, according to Financial Times. US overtook Russia as a supplier of gas to Europe in September 2022 and has since 2023 accounted for about a fifth of the region's supply. But last month, Russian pipe gas and LNG shipments accounted for 15% of total supply to the EU, UK, Switzerland, Serbia, Bosnia and Herzegovina and North Macedonia, according to data from ICS. You've also got to understand that some of these countries are not part of the EU and actually under the sphere of influence of Russia, or at least increasingly becoming so. Yeah, it's definitely a challenge, but I believe somewhere else I was reading, I should have got that other source actually, that there are some extenuating circumstances for that. Okay, UK's Ministry of Defence says Russia's labour shortage is a growing problem. As Putin's 3-day war enters its third year, Russia's cost of war exceeds $211 billion. It's got a growing labour shortage problem. There were 4.8 million workers. They were short of 4.8 million workers in 2023, and it's partly been caused by the war, mobilization of the working population, and emigration by some skilled professionals seeking to avoid mobilization. And the 3-day war is going to 3 years, costing $211 billion. The militarization of the economy continues to build problems for the future of the Russian people. Might have some short-term benefits, but there are long-term ramifications for a war-footing economy. Hungary says it stopped blocking Ukraine's aid to bid to join the EU. That's good news there. Don't know what shenanigans have gone, what deals have been done behind closed doors. Accession negotiations will not begin, but only after Hungarian foreign minister says they secured more rights for ethnic Hungarians in the west of Ukraine. Will begin, that should say, from Tim White there. So that's good news, although they have used that as leverage, the Hungarians. Romanian foreign ministry has refused to issue visas and permission to enter the country to all members of the Russian delegation for the planned session of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly. So this is a European security group, right, that Russia is normally a part of, but they've been refused visas by Romania that is obviously hosting the meeting. That's incredible. Again, pariah state. Poland establishes a special commission to investigate Russian and Belarusian influence over the past 20 years. Belarus joins in the second stage of Russian nuclear drills. So a couple bits there. Now, Poland doing that, that's really important. What you need is a good understanding in Poland, and you need this in every country, of how much Russia has, and in this case Belarus, has influenced the running of Poland here. But do you know we should do that in the UK? Our government refused to do an official report or release the official report on the meddling in the Brexit elections because they thought it would cause too much problem with regard to people saying it should be rerun and stuff like that. That may have happened, but do you know what? We need to understand how much Russia is meddling in our country. We as a population need to understand that. And every nation in Europe, and I would say particularly America and elsewhere, the US is obviously has a lot of social media influence from Russian troll and bot farms. You got Latin America, you got Africa, all of these countries that are so problematically influenced by Russia. We need to understand to what extent this is taking place, and it's good news that Poland is starting up an inquiry into that. Poland will help allies in the Baltic Sea area detect ships of the shadow fleet illegally transporting Russian oil products, according to the Polish Foreign Ministry, so that's really good news as well. Here we have a little bit of international politics. Actually, this does pertain to Ukraine here. So what they're going to do about Ukraine says, so this is Emmanuel Macron talking about these other parties, or there's that left, because he's a centrist, some might say centre-right, but Macron is centrist. You've got this left alliance that is getting together to fight off Rassemblement National, the new, well, not new, but the surge of the far-right party in French politics. And then you've got Les Républicains, who are centre-right, who might be was considering doing a deal with Rassemblement National. So the left have got into an alliance. Now, Macron here is talking about, well, what does this say about aid to Ukraine? And what they're going to do about Ukraine, he asked, they think the opposite. The Social Democrats in the LFI about both Ukraine and Gaza, they think the opposite. The National Rally and Les Républicains, we are among crazy people. It's not serious. I believe in political outreach, but on the basis of coherence. So the idea is that there are these contradictory views on both, Israel and Ukraine within these different parties and amongst each other, and it's not coherent, and he's probably not wrong there. Now, we've had quite a bit of news on Trump. I talked about how he is looking like he's going to cut off aid prior to his election into the White House to Ukraine. Trump claimed that he would have that US aid to Ukraine settled prior to taking the White House as president-elect. He describes Zelensky as the best salesman. I think Zelensky is maybe the greatest salesman of any politician that's ever lived. Every time he comes to our country, he walks away with $60 billion. Now, here's a beauty. He just left 4 days ago with $60 billion. He wasn't there 4 days ago. That's just complete bollocks. And he gets home and he announces he needs another $60 billion. It never ends, Trump claimed. I will have that settled prior to taking the White House as president-elect. Yeah, so if you have any doubt about what Trump thinks of Ukraine, there you go. Pretty obvious. It's interesting though with Trump. He recently went to the Capitol, spoke to Republicans in the Senate and the House of Representatives. They came out saying, "Oh, it's wonderful, wonderful." He also spoke on the way. He went to meet a bunch of CEOs. It's very similar to meeting a bunch of people from the oil industry. He's basically pimping out his administration if he gets in to doing whatever people pay him to do. So he said to the oil magnate or the oil companies, if you pay me $1 billion, I'll reduce regulation and you can do kind of what you like, and you know I'll have bills in your favor. It's just, seriously, where's your ideology? Where's your what you think is right? It's just like, whoever pays me the most, you get to write the legislation for the next government. It's absolutely insane. And anyway, he went to a meeting with CEOs, and apparently, according to some people, some of the CEOs, rather than the politicians coming out, Marjorie Taylor Greene coming out saying, "Oh, he spoke to me." If you see that interview, it's really cringe. Where she goes, "Oh, and he's so funny, he's so great, and he recognized, he spoke to me. Oh, Trump, oh." So they were all fawning over Trump. But some of the CEOs apparently saying, well, actually, he's meandering, doesn't make any sense, and it was not cool.
I will say I was surprised. I spoke to a number of CEOs who I would say walked into the meeting being Trump supporter-ish or thinking that they might be leaning that direction, who said that he was remarkably meandering, could not keep a straight thought, was all over the map, and that they, which maybe not surprising, but was interesting to me because these were people who I think might have been actually predisposed to him and actually walked out of the room less predisposed to him, actually predisposed to thinking this is not necessarily, as one person said, this may not be any different or better than a Biden thought if you're thinking that way.
The only thing I
So I thought that was a bit interesting. Going over to very quickly to UK politics, I've talked about how there's bipartisan support for Ukraine, which is really good news. I was talking about this last night in a talk. I actually mentioned this fact that when you look at the manifestos of the Conservative and Labour, the party manifestos, there's very little on international security and the seriousness of the threat to UK from Russia and what's happening to European security. I don't think it's that the two parties don't recognise this. I think this is that it's not a big vote winner to most of the public. It would be a big vote winner for me. Like if one party came out and totally ruled it on international diplomacy and international security, like that would mean a lot to me. But yet it doesn't really feature. But we know from their actions that they know it's serious. Like both Conservative and Labour. Labour have been out in Kyiv as shadow politicians. Shadow cabinet members have been out there. Normandy, again, they were taking that seriously. They've been putting things in place because Labour have previously been seen, because of they've been more left wing. They've previously been seen as not good on national security. Defence and the economy are like what the Conservatives have traditionally been perceived as being stronger on. And we can debate that ad infinitum. But Labour have now gone so centrist, and they really are doubling down on this centrism, that they are trying to sell themselves as very serious on the economy and very serious on defence. And yet, actually, it featured very little in the manifesto. So interesting there. Going back to the US. Sorry, this is slightly out of order. Interesting video from Brian Tyler Cohen here about how lots of evidence has now come out that Kennedy, RFK Jr., the third party candidate who's previously was seen very much to be taking voters from the Biden camp, it's a little bit more complex now, I think. But his funding appears to be coming from Republican donors, big Republican donors. In other words, and not because they switched from Republicans, but it's because he's being funded knowing that he's going to eat into Biden. This is very much a strategic approach. I don't know what I think about that, whether that's clever or insidious. But yeah, he's being funded basically by the GOP. Fascinating. And then on Russian state TV, Julia Davis from Russian Media Monitor says they couldn't be more pleased with Trump's visit to Capitol. So those meetings I was talking about with regard to meeting the Senate and representatives and CEOs, of course, this is the first time he's been back to the Capitol since January the 6th and the insurrection and the riots and et cetera, et cetera. So it's highly controversial that he was actually welcomed by politicians who had previously blamed him as being morally responsible for that, even shook hands with Mitch McConnell, and they hadn't spoken, I think, for a couple of years. This was a real capitulation of the GOP to the, genuflecting at the altar of Trump, where you've basically seen the party coalesce around power, the desire for power, rather than desire for what's morally right and what's good for the country. Because I think it's morally bad for the country that if Trump was to get in, and you've got politicians that we know feel that, and yet they are giving up and going, do you know what? You're fine by me, Trump. Come back to Capitol, and we'll support you. Anyway, Russian TV has been delighting in this. They couldn't be more pleased with Trump's visit to the Capitol in light of his alleged criticism of the USA to Ukraine. So again, like when you want to know who's going to be good and bad for Ukraine, look to the Russian propagandists and the Russian media to see who they are supporting, and they are so overtly supporting Trump that it makes you wonder how people can't see that Trump is surely going to be bad for Ukraine. Anyway, that's enough from me. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care. Speak soon.